right, so let's just pick up, and I'm actually going to read verses 6 through 8. As for the person who turns to mediums and spiritists to play the harlot after them, I will also set my face against that person and will cut him off from among his people. You shall consecrate yourselves, therefore, and be holy, for I am the Lord your God. And you shall keep my statutes and practice them. I am the Lord who sanctifies you. All right. What is this about? I'm sorry? Okay. Trying to find answers somewhere other than God. Looking for uh, information, hidden information, information that we don't have and can't have, but who might have it? Spirits, those that have died. So we're talking about necromancy largely, is what we're talking about when we talk about mediums and spiritists. Talking about the practice of necromancy. The practice of necromancy was the same thing then that it is today. And by the way, it's still floating around out there. You can still go to spiritists today who'll tell you that they can talk to people on the other side. They call themselves by different names. For a while, it was mediums. That's when I was a teenager and in my early adulthood. I think they have another name for it now because about every decade you have to change what you call yourself to bring in new customers. But everybody is trying to accomplish the same thing by appealing to those folks and by going to those folks. And it's to get information that we don't have the means of getting. Uh, do we have a source of information about things that are unknown? Yes. And if we get to, for instance, First Peter, he tells us that God has revealed unto us all things pertaining to life and godliness. Now, if we trust God and if we trust the Word of God, and He has told us that He has given us all the information that we need pertaining to living life and godliness, having fellowship with Him, what more information do we need from, and I'll use the common idiom for it, from the other side? What information do we need from the grave? And the answer is we don't really need anything, yet we're terribly curious about that stuff. So much so that at least the last time I checked, people who practice this make not individuals but collectively make billions of dollars every year. Um, People that are spending that kind of money to get this information, they're looking for something that they know they can't get on their own. And what he's saying to them is, look, don't go to those sources. Trust me. Because if you go to now, there's a phrase in here that has confused some people, so I'll go ahead and bring it up to talk about it for a minute. If you go to those mediums and spirits to play the harlot after them, I've actually read some commentators that suggest, well, there must have been some kind of sexual immorality that was associated with that. I don't think that's the point at all. I think much like James 4:4, when we're called adulteresses for being unfaithful to God, that this is a spiritual application of the idea of playing the harlot. Idolatry very often is referred to as playing the harlot. And that's all I take from this. And what he's basically saying is, look, you're in a covenant with me. What's the most common covenant on the earth? Marriage. That is the most common covenant on the earth among men. What do we call it when someone is married and they go to someone else and engage in what should be marital relations with someone outside of the marriage? We call it adultery, harlotry, many other things, but that's the we are in a he's just entered into a covenant relationship with these people. And he is saying to them, if you go to look for guidance, direction, and instruction and knowledge from someone other than me, that is being unfaithful to the covenant. Uh, is God going to withhold information from us that we need? No. Do we trust him? So this is what he goes on to say. You shall consecrate yourselves. What's that word mean? Consecrate. Yeah. Set yourself apart. As part of the marriage vows, do we say something along the lines of to keep yourself to him and to him only, or to keep yourself to her and to her only? Yes. What does that mean? Well, to consecrate yourself to them, to set yourself apart for them. You belong to them now, and no one else. He said that's what you need to do. You have to consecrate yourselves and be holy, for I, the Lord your God, I am the Lord your God, and you shall keep my statutes. And that's the contrast here. What the Spiritists have to say is being contrasted to what God says. You shall keep my statutes and practice them. I am the Lord who sanctifies you. What's that word sanctify mean? To set you apart and to make you holy. If the point is to be separated from sin and made holy and in fellowship with God, he says, listen to my commandments and my statutes. Don't go to other sources looking for secret information. By the time the New Testament rolled around, there was a whole class of supposed Christians who believed that there was a whole secret body of knowledge that you could get if you did certain things. What did they call themselves? The Gnostics. There was a bunch of teaching that had to be done against Gnostic doctrines, and those. We're always seeking to know what we can't know. And he's saying, just listen to what I've told you. And the way I've expressed it for a long time is there's enough, I have a hard enough time knowing this, understanding this, applying this, and living. I don't need more stuff. And yet people will not pay attention to anything that he has revealed and constantly be searching for things of which he said nothing. And we have to be very careful and avoid that. We belong to God. We're set apart to God. We don't seek guidance and direction from other sources, but instead we keep and practice the Lord's statutes. So then he goes on to verse 9 and talks about some penalties if there's anyone who curses his father or his mother. What what does that mean? What's it? Okay, put them down. Okay. Anybody have any other thoughts? All right. I don't think this is talking about a one-off act that happens as a matter of frustration. I think every teenager on the planet at some point has uttered words like "I hate you" or "I wish you were dead" or some other word. I'm probably going to get blocked off Facebook for saying that. Uh, or something like that to their parents at a time of frustration. I don't think that's what this is talking about. I think this is talking about a persistent and serious kind of rebellion. Defined back, let's look at Deuteronomy 21 for a moment. Um, between all these little pieces of paper, I'll get to it. Deuteronomy 21, I want to look at verses 18 through 21. Let the Bible serve as kind of a commentary for itself. If any man has a stubborn and rebellious son who will not obey his father or his mother, and when they chastise him, he will not even listen to them, then his father and mother shall seize him and bring him out to the elders of the city at the gateway of his hometown. They shall say to the elders of his city, this son of ours is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey us. He is a glutton and a drunkard. Then all the men of his city shall stone him to death. So you shall remove the evil from your midst. Okay, so we're not talking about somebody here who just, in a moment of frustration, says something. Uh, we're talking about a glutton and a drunkard and a rebellious person that has consistently refused not only to listen to their parents and learn from their parents, but also do what? Consistently refuse the correction of their parents. That's the kind of thing that's being talked about here. And he says in this place, just like he does over there in Deuteronomy, that his blood guiltiness is upon him. That just simply means that he's guilty and deserving of death. Sexual sins largely are what's talked about in verses 10 through 21. We've gone through some of those already. We'll just kind of hit the highlights here. In verse 10, adultery results in death for both participants. I want to point that out because there's a famous case in the New Testament where there's a woman who's caught in adultery that's brought to the Lord. And they say, we know she's guilty. We caught her in the very act. But when you read that story, guess who is absent? The man. They didn't bring him, which is why it is clear that they are not trying to pursue righteousness, and they're not trying to pursue the law of God, and they're not honest brokers in this. And that is what Jesus is talking about when he says, let he who is without sin go ahead and carry out the punishment. And that sin that he had in mind was not ever having sinned in your life, because listen, there's no one who has never sinned in their life. That sin that he's talking about is guilt in that case. They were not making a righteous judgment, and they were not seeking to do a righteous thing, because the law says that both participants are guilty and that both participants receive the same judgment. Verse 11, relations with the father's wife brings death. I don't think this is talking about a mother. I think this is talking about a father's wife, which would be a stepmother is what we might call them. Relations with a daughter-in-law, verse 12, brings forth death. A man lying with a male as with a woman results in death. We are, I guess, relatively familiar with that verse, and you hear people talk about that verse a lot and bring up that verse. But I want you to, I mean, we need to be clear, and we need to be honest brokers about this. That's not a worse sin than the rest of the sins in this list. That's just another example of the kinds of sins that he's talking about. Just like adultery, it's not somehow worse than adultery, and it doesn't get judged any different, and they have the same penalty. Man lying, taking a woman and her mother, verse 14, is condemned as being, bestiality is condemned in verses 15 and 16. And the interesting thing about that is, even in bestiality, he says what? What's the judgment on that case? You stone them, but not just the person, the animal too. Now, I'm going to go out on a limb and say the animal didn't have anything to do with it. That was the human being's actions. But he says stone the animal too. And he's teaching. He's teaching about how serious these things are and how they defile people. We cannot engage in this kind of behavior and maintain fellowship with God. It's just that simple. Relations with a sister Kind of interesting. Look at verse 17. Let's actually read verse 17 because this one's interesting. We've got all these things, their blood guiltiness is upon them. They're to be stoned. We get to verse 17. If there's a man who takes his sister, his father's daughter, or his mother's daughter, that's an important language as well. I think it's implying that it's a half sister, not a full sister. But anyway, so that he sees her nakedness and she sees his nakedness, it is a disgrace, and they shall be cut off in the sight of the sons of their people. He has uncovered his sister's nakedness, and he bears his guilt. Now, this is not to say that this is an okay behavior, but the judgment and the penalty is different than the rest of the list up to this point. What does this idea of cutting them off mean? It means to sever. The idea is to sever ties with them. Uh, in the New Testament, and as it applies to the church, what's the language we would use? To withdraw fellowship. Um, and so they are to be cut off from the people. Relations during, oh, by the way, I'll also throw this in quite interestingly, quite famously. This relationship describes whom? Abraham and Sarah, the father of this nation. Um, Relations during a woman's menstrual impurity results in being cut off. Uh, Relations with an aunt or uncle's wife. Again, I think the suggestion here is that it's the person that the blood relative is married to, not the blood relative. Thus, it's not referred to as incest. Um, Taking a brother's wife. It has an interesting penalty. Look at verse 21 with me. If there is a man who takes his brother's wife, it is abhorrent. He has uncovered his brother's nakedness. She's joined to the brother. They've become one. They shall be childless. Who's the only person that has any control over that? God. So this is a judgment that God is saying, I'm going to impose. Now, what's the problem with that? Flip over to Deuteronomy 25 for just a moment. Deuteronomy 25. I'm going to read another commandment, something that's required of the people. Look with me at verses 5 and 6. When brothers live together and one of them dies and has no son, the wife of the deceased shall not be married outside the family to a strange man. Her husband's brother shall go into her and take her to himself as wife, and perform the duty of a husband's brother to her. And it shall be that the firstborn whom she bears shall assume the name of his dead brother, and his name may not be blotted out from Israel. Well, why then does it say here in this verse that if a man goes in and takes his brother's wife, that it's abhorrent and they shall be childless? That's right. That's the thing that people miss. The thing that people miss when they bring this up and say, wait a minute, what about this? Is in the Deuteronomy case, the spouse has died. That's not what this is talking about. In this case, spouse is still alive. And what is that? It's adultery. There's a really famous case of it in the New Testament. It involved some preaching by John the Baptist. And he told someone, you have your brother's wife. And what happened to him he lost his head. Literally lost his head. But it goes on. Things like that happen. Um, People I know, things like that happen. And it is not an honorable thing. It is not something that God wants his children engaging in. And it's the kind of behavior that impedes fellowship with God. And he's trying to teach them that. He's trying to teach them to make good judgments about these relationships. Uh, and God's judgments about relationships define what's acceptable, not man's. Violators and violations are treated as defiling, and they are met with severe penalties, including sometimes, for some of these things, even death. How serious does that mean God takes this kind of behavior? Yeah, it's pretty serious. Now, notice what happens in verses 22, 23, and 24. Moreover, you shall not follow the customs of the nation which I shall drive out before you. For they did all these things, and therefore I have abhorred them. Hence I have said to you, you are to possess their land, and I myself will give it to you to possess it, a land flowing with milk and honey. I am the Lord your God, who has separated you from the peoples. You are therefore to make a distinction between the clean animal and the unclean. By the way, this goes way back to chapter 17 now. The clean animal and the unclean, between the unclean bird and the clean, you shall not make yourselves detestable by animal or by bird or by anything that creeps on the ground, which I have separated for you as unclean. Thus you're to be holy to me, for I am the Lord, for I the Lord am holy, and I have set you apart from the people to be mine. He's giving them a warning. Now, what are they receiving? What is this all about? What's going on here? Why have they been carried out of Egyptian bondage? Why has he brought them across the wilderness? Why has he given them this law and made this covenant with them and made what is happening here? Okay, he is preparing the nation for a Messiah, but this goes all the way back to Genesis 15. All the way back to Genesis 15 when Abraham, who has left his home and went out not knowing where he's going at the Lord's command, and followed him and went where he was told to go when he was told to go, and he gets to this property, and God says to him, all right, look around. Look, as far as you can see north and south, as far as you can see east and west, your descendants are going to have this land. And I'm going to make a great nation out of your descendants. And they're going to dwell in this land, and through your seed, all nations will be blessed. And so there's this series of promises that are made there. And it becomes very clear in the story that it is not just any child of Abraham, but a specific child, Isaac. And Isaac had how many sons? Two, Jacob and Esau. And which one was older? Esau. But it was not Esau. In fact, Esau sold his birthright to Jacob. And then Jacob tricked his father into giving him not just the birthright, but also what? The blessing. And Jacob is the line. Well, what do we know about Jacob? How many sons did Jacob have? Add one more to that, we'll be rocking. Benjamin, don't forget Benjamin. He came up last. What's that all about? There was 12 tribes. Yeah, it's confusing. Joseph didn't have a land. Joseph's two sons had a land. Um, what do we know about this whole situation? That's the parents of these people. And they are now finally receiving this promise. They're about to get the land that was promised to Abraham long before. Long before. A lot of stuff happens in between then and now. There were people living there already, whole list of them. The Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Kadamites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Rephaim, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, the Jebusites, and the Hivites all occupied this land. By the way, all of those ites, that just means the descendants of kin, the descendants of this person, the descendants. So we got all these families that are dwelling in this land. By the way, the Canaanites, who were they? Well, they were the descendants of Canaan, who was one of the descendants of Ham. These are the people living on this land. So, how did the Israelites, the descendants of Israel, come to possess this land? Well, God talks about it right here. He said, "You're to possess this land." This is verse 24. "I myself will give it to you to possess, a land flowing with milk and honey. I'm giving it to you." What did he say in the verse just before that? "I shall drive these people out." Why? Because they have done these things that I just told you not to do, and I have abhorred them. And so, because they have done these things, I'm removing them from the land and I'm giving it to you. And then he says, so if you live like they live, guess what? The same thing's going to happen to you. I will remove you from this land. Now, this gets a whole lot more detailed at the end of the book of Deuteronomy, particularly around verse 28. Verse 28, chapter 28, where he goes through a whole long list and says, look, if you do these things, you're gone. If you don't do these things, you will dwell in this land forever. Did they do these things? Yes. Did they remain in the land? No. There's these big lessons from this thing, which is this: just because you are someone who has been atoned for, and you've entered into a covenant relationship with God, and you have received blessings from God and promises from God, and you've been told that these promises are perpetual. Just because all of that is true does not mean what? That your behavior cannot cause you to default in the relationship. That is the way every covenant that has ever been made has worked. There are responsibilities on both sides. And if you don't meet your responsibilities, what is the result? The covenant is broken, and the other party is what? Free from their obligations. And again, I told you a lot earlier that the most common covenant among men is what? Marriage. And God even applies that same principle to marriage. If the covenant is not honored, if a person is unfaithful, what has God said? In that one case, he said what? Divorcement is permitted. The covenant is gone. Um, he's serious about this. This stuff flies in the face of the common belief that so many people have bought into that once you are in a relationship with God, it doesn't matter anymore. You've been saved, and so you will always be in that condition of being saved. Commonly, we refer to it as once saved, always saved. Um, the fact of the matter is, God has never worked that way. He's never suggested that it works that way. And He's taught us from the very beginning that it doesn't work that way. Adam and Eve, did they have fellowship with God? Yeah, about as close fellowship as humans have ever had with God. They were with Him, His very presence with wisdom in the garden. Where did they live? In a special garden that was planted by God specifically for them. Did they have any blessings from God? A whole host. The biggest one being what? What was in the midst of the garden? The tree of life. When they ate of the fruit of the tree of life, what did that do? Kept them alive. For how long? Forever. But when they broke the covenant, what happened to them? They became afraid of God. They hid from God. They were separated from God. They were expelled from the garden. They were prevented from entering the garden specifically because the tree of life was there. And He said, if they can go in and eat of the tree of life, then they'll live forever. And He put guards at the gate of the garden so that they could not enter it again. And He turned them loose into the world. From day one, this is the way God has worked with man. We are obligated to maintain fellowship with Him. And the way in which we do that is we strive to maintain our holiness. How many times does He say it in this one chapter alone? For I am holy. Now, can we maintain our holiness? That's a loaded question. I'll go ahead and give y'all fair warning. I worded it that way intentionally. The answer is yes, we can, but not on our own. Is there a righteous man on earth who continually practices righteousness and who never sins? No. That's not my statement. That's God's statement. Ecclesiastes 7:20. Indeed, there is not a righteous man on earth who continually practices righteousness and who never sins. So I can guarantee you that we can't maintain our holiness on our own. But He has told them about a series of things that they could do in order to maintain their holiness and maintain their fellowship with God. Various sacrifices and things that they were obligated to do. And all of that was a shadow pointing forward to what? To Christ and to His church. All of it. The atonement sacrifice was really just a shadow of what was going to take place on the cross. And when you get to the book of Hebrews, you're told that the blood of bulls and goats, which is what was offered at the atonement, the blood of bulls and goats could never take away sin. It was always looking forward to what God, and by the way, that was the end of the promise to Abraham. He said, I'm going to make a great nation out of your descendants. In fact, He actually said there's going to be two great nations out of Abraham. At Abraham's request, He blessed Ishmael as well. But He said, I'm going to make a great nation out of your descendants. I am going to give them this land. And then He said, from your seed, all nations will be blessed. When you get to the New Testament, it is made very clear that He did not say, and your seeds, plural, but unto your seed. And it explains very clearly that that is talking about Christ, which again is why Matthew spends so much time showing the connection between Jesus and Abraham. So that we understand that He's the seed, which all nations will be. This has always been about delivering all people. But he tells them, if you want to maintain fellowship with me, if you want to be able to come into my presence, if you want to have this relationship with me, it's going to require you to live in such a way that you are holy. And I'm going to help you. What was the first way that God helped them? He gave them the information about what was right and what was wrong, what was good and what was evil, what would make them unclean. He taught them the things that they should avoid or the things that they must do so that they could maintain fellowship. That's the first thing he did for them. And then he provided a means to atone for the sins that they had committed, to establish a relationship with them. But their failure to distinguish between the people of the world, their failure to live separate and distinct and different lives than the people that are going to be judged by God, when we live like everyone else in the world and do the same things everybody else in the world does, and it affects our ability to be in fellowship with God. And then in verse 27, he does something really, really interesting. Earlier in this chapter, he's talked about people who consult mediums and spiritists. Then he says, if a man or a woman who is a medium or spiritist shall surely be put to death, they shall be stoned with stones. Their blood guiltiness is upon them. Anybody who goes around telling people, I can give you information about things like this, is setting themselves up in the place of God. What he's talking about there are false prophets. People who say, I can give you the information that you need, the information that you seek. And nobody can do that. So that is going to be a final judgment. Anybody have any questions or comments? We have to understand that this is all instruction about how to maintain fellowship with God. And that is why these things are just as applicable to us as we're not under the law of Moses. And so none of the particulars of the law itself apply. But the principle of maintaining holiness and purity and listening to the law of God and following the commands of God and being a distinct and separate people, all of that still applies. The reason why the things of the law of Moses itself don't apply is because it was always a shadow looking toward Christ, and he fulfilled it all. And so now we have his law. All right. Appreciate everybody's presence and the comments that we received.
I